Yes, fantastic. Is this working now?
Looks great. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks
Thank you.
for working through some technical difficulties. Despite a year or so, I guess it was with COVID, um, we still once in a while new systems, new platforms. So thank you for your patience. It's really my pleasure to talk with you about the 2024 U.S. elections, and we'll talk about today. So I don't know if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide.
Oops. Here.
Okay, great. And so I will give you a little preview of what's to come, and I want to also allow for an opportunity for questions, not only towards the end, but throughout our time together today. So don't hesitate to stop and raise a question. So I'm going to talk a bit about what's coming in the U.S., what's here already, what's coming, what the implications of the election are for the U.S. political system, for the American society more generally. And right now we're in the middle of the primary season. And the way that this would typically work is that the incumbent candidate, the person who holds office, will go on to continue and will win primary elections and will be officially nominated as the party's choice in the summer. The challenging party would be looking to determine who their candidate should be. And by this point, we probably would know. But this election has been atypical because the conclusion was known even before we really started this process, that former President Trump was so far ahead and faced a few challengers, but most of those, with the exception maybe of Nikki Haley, quickly dropped out of the race. And even Nikki Haley is the second in line, dropped out maybe faster than we would normally expect to see. So that means we're already in the US system in the middle of the general election, even though it's in November. And so this is what makes US politics and culture so dramatically different than many other political systems. The window for the campaign is not narrowed down to, say, a set of weeks or months. It's ongoing. It's really even starts from the day the president takes office. He or she is already going to be thinking about their next time running for re-election, or their party's next time running for re-election. And so we also, though, what often gets overlooked is that we have elections for Congress, and Congress in the U.S. Is two chambers. And so there's the House of Representatives and the Senate. And unlike a lot of parliamentary systems, these chambers both have significant power. In fact, any piece of legislation has to pass through and be approved in both chambers. So if you would have, for example, a proposal, a bill to raise the minimum wage, and the House says, let's raise it to 10 US dollars an hour, and the Senate says 11 US dollars an hour. Until they agreed on a precise dollar value in both chambers, you would not have that proposal go forward. So what's happening in the House and the Senate is going to be really critical. I'm not going to talk at all today, but there are a lot of state and local elections, governors, state legislatures, and they too have significant influence on people's lives in the United States. And just for sake of time, we won't have an opportunity. Anna, next slide, please. So to think quickly, to ask a question, if the general election, and I would like to maybe an audience member or two to chime in, if the general election were held today between Biden and Trump, who do you think would win and why? Give you a moment to kind of think that through. Any thoughts, any comments? Otherwise, we can go, you can think it through and I can go ahead and move on. But if someone wanted to, so I see maybe one hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. I'm afraid Donald Trump, because I guess, and from what I see on the internet, people are discouraged with Biden, specifically because of his age and the PR that it creates.
We
Okay,
also
thanks.
have another raised hand.
Good, one more, please.
Yes, I also think it's gonna be Trump. I think that many people who would vote for Biden are pro-Palestinians, and the things that he does in this war are very discouraging.
Okay, thanks. So I've got 2 for Trump, and the rest I'll leave you to think. So this is the first comment, especially about Biden's age, is something that has been following him for much of the campaign. It is very much true that he is already our oldest president, would be our oldest president to be reelected. What's interesting to me is that in part, when you think about the age, Trump isn't too much younger than Biden, right? Trump is in his late 70s. And so part of me wonders, is there a ceiling? Is it, once you've crossed 80 years old, that becomes too old? And so in other words, there's less that's been said in the media about former President Trump's age than has been said about President Biden's age. And for reasons I'm not quite sure, but it is an interesting phenomenon that Biden does have a lot of attention paid to his age. I've been saying a running joke when I give this presentation, that is, if I were a campaign consultant for President Biden, I would say, President Biden, it's time not to have any more birthdays. So let's not have any more. Let's stay the age that we are, or maybe go back in time a few years. But this is a good point that you make. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk first briefly about Congress. And Congress has been especially interesting right now in the US system because it's a very contentious and polarized place. This is a scene from when Kevin McCarthy was chosen by many to be the Speaker of the House, but not by everyone in the Republican Party. And there was contention. It was visible on the floor. You can see one member of Congress pointing to Kevin McCarthy, who's the gentleman on the right with the grayish hair standing. And it took a long time to choose Kevin McCarthy as the Speaker of the House, and then he was ousted. And now we have a new Speaker of the House who's having similar challenges in keeping Republicans united, and has worked with Democrats in ways that we've not seen happen in the US system in many years. It's very atypical to see votes that, for example, have more support from Democrats than they do from Republicans. And the recent vote to provide aid for Ukraine is an example of that, where there were more Democratic members of the House voting in favor than there were Republicans. There were enough together to pass, but still, it gives you a sense of the divisions right now and the challenges within the Republican Party, from very conservative members to more moderate members. Next slide. So one of the things we can tell, and I'll have you do a couple clicks if you don't mind. And I think the first one, if you will, the advantage incumbents, I just want to say a brief word about that. And so if we look at I'm going to ask you to donate, thanks. If we just scroll down just slightly, one of the interesting things about US politics is that although people often complain about Congress, as they do in many systems, right? I mean, we oftentimes complain about our government, that it doesn't get the things done that we want it to. What you'll see here is the re-election rates for any individual member, in this case of the House of Representatives. And what I want to point out to you is that these are remarkably high. Notice that the top line is 100%. In most election years, those who seek to run for re-election are re-elected at astoundingly high rates. So as much as Americans, and again, this is similar across other political systems, but as much as Americans complain about Congress, when it comes time to re-elect their member of Congress, they say yes. So in other words, they say something like, well, I don't like Congress, but I really like my own member. He or she is doing a great job, and so I'm going to re-elect him or her. So that means there isn't much turnover in Congress. Where there is turnover is when a member retires, which can happen. Member dies in office. Sadly, that can happen. Or a member resigns. Maybe that member was worried about the next election and thought better to go out not having lost, but having won instead. Most of the people who are there will be there in 2025. Okay, back to the slides, please.
Okay, how do I do that? That's a good question. Okay, here we go. The next one.
Great work, thank you. This is a good thing. Thank you. Oh, they were there. Oh, we can continue on the slides. I don't need to click through all the links. I'll have them there for reference.
Oh, you just want to see the slide? Is this?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. So you can click on these links later if you have them. The cost of running has soared. So we're talking for the presidential elections in total, billions of dollars are spent. It's hard to imagine that amount of money. An election for congressional elections, typically millions of dollars are raised to spend on typically TV advertisements, but rallies, door-to-door canvassing. I wanted to stop to say in a moment, there is greater diversity in Congress based on both gender and race and ethnicity. There's still much progress remains, but if you're interested, there's a link there that you can click. And let's go ahead to the next slide.
To the next slide, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so to give you just a little bit of a sense of Congress, I've got a lot of detail here. I'll just overview quickly. The majorities in both chambers are really small. And so the Senate right now is 51 Democrats. There are 10 competitive elections coming up in November. Democrats defending 8 of those. Defend 8 elections, particularly in places like, for example, West Virginia. That's a state where Trump has had a lot of support, but has had a Democratic senator. So that's one where the Republicans might pick up a victory, for example. Montana is another Democratic senator running for re-election, facing a challenge. The House is similarly, there's right now 218 Republicans and 213 Democrats. Again, in the US system, not most people vote according to their party, but not everyone. And they have liberty. They can vote against their party. As we saw with Ukraine, the Republican vote was split. It wasn't united. So those slim majorities make it hard for any party to bring everyone together to pass legislation. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Just this, back one slide really quickly. So for those who are interested, there is this great website called 270 to Win, and I have links for both the House and also the Senate. We don't need to click on them, but you can look and find out a little bit more if you want to, see where the competitive elections are and what implications that might have. Okay, now to the next. All right, so what I want to say is that the biggest changes in US politics and society will happen if one party wins both the House and the Senate and the presidency. At this point, that likelihood, not to conjecture, which is always hard to speculate, but maybe that likelihood is higher for the Republicans than it is for the Democrats, in part because the Democrats have to, those 10 competitive seats, they're holding on to 8 of them. That's a lot. That could easily go in the Republicans' favor. So if you have a system, the system we have now, Republicans control the House, the Democrats the Senate, the Democrats the presidency, we should expect continued gridlock for the next several years. Certainly the president is a powerful political actor on his own, but to get laws passed, you need a Congress. And so as an example, think about the amount of time that former President Trump talked about building the wall, right? That was not accomplished during his presidency because he faced resistance in Congress. He could not do that on his own. He needed Congress to pass the legislation to put that forward. So if we have divided government, we should expect continued gridlock. If the Democrats manage to capture the House, the Senate, and the presidency, well, we still have this mechanism in the Senate that requires on most pieces of legislation a super majority. A filibuster can stop legislation unless 60 members of the Senate say, okay, time to move on. We've heard enough. Let's vote. And 60 is a lot in the current polarized political climate. Now, the filibuster is not in the Constitution. That's part of the Senate's own structure. Democrats have pushed to change that when they controlled the majority recently and at present, and there wasn't enough appetite to do it. Maybe if Republicans take the majority, maybe there will be an appetite to revise that such that you could pass legislation with just 51 votes. Should that happen, should there be a rules change in the Senate, Republicans capture the House and the White House, you can expect some pretty major policy change to happen in the United States. What might that mean? It might mean major overhauls to our tax reform system, changes to Social Security, the pension system, changes to Medicare, the healthcare system for the elderly, changes to Obamacare, a healthcare structure in place to provide access, changes to Medicaid, healthcare for those of lesser economic means. Those are some of the big items, education, policy more generally, all those things with a unified government that can pass things through the House and the Senate and the presidency could mean big differences. Okay, thanks. Next slide. So let's shift gears now. I want to talk about the presidential election. And one of the things, when I'm talking with students, I often say, if you think about the US system, the first person that comes to mind, of course, is the president. But remember, our Constitution was written back in 1787. And at the time, the presidency was a new political office. The founders were wary of creating too powerful an executive. They were concerned about, their experience under Great Britain, under King George and the Prime Minister. And the president actually is featured in Article 2 of the Constitution. And it's a much shorter article than Congress, which is Article 1. So the powers given to the president, if you look at the list in Article 2, are not all that great, certainly compared to what presidents do today. And what has changed? Two things, I think, especially that have made the president really powerful in our political system and in society. And one is the oath of office. The president pledges to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. That gives presidents a lot of power if they are facing potential threats. For example, you might see immigration. It's his power to pass laws about immigration.
Okay, I'm afraid we lost Philip.
Yeah, you lost.
Yeah, we lost it for a moment. Yeah, just can you say the last sentence again, please? Oh, we lost him again.
I'm here now.
Yes, you're
Yes?
here now. Yes,
Okay.
but it just
Sorry
comes
about
in
that.
those-
The signals look strong, but it's possible that it will fade. I'm sorry about that. So the president has the power of preserving, protecting the Constitution, also to take care that laws be faithfully executed. And what that means is that as Congress passes laws, the presidency, the executive branch of government, becomes more powerful. And so as Congress passes laws about immigration, the president is tasked with implementing those. And so as a result, becomes more powerful in almost a symbiotic relationship with Congress. Finally, the president has taken on the opportunity to pass executive orders. These have become increasingly more common. They're like laws, but they're not laws. And so these give presidents a lot of power. They're typically directives to the executive branch, but they give presidents a lot of power, but the next president could easily change those, could overturn them, could write his or her own. So executive orders do not have the stability of laws, but they're an increasingly common tool for presidents. Next slide. So what does it look like in terms of the prospects for re-election for President Biden or prospects for Trump winning? And research has shown that it comes down to two things especially that weigh on voters' minds. One is the state of the economy, and one is the current approval of the president. They go hand in hand. If the economy is poor, approval tends to go down, but approval also captures, like, what you think about any issue that's before facing the US today. So for the economy, without clicking on the link, let me tell you that the economy is pretty good, comparatively speaking. Inflation has come way down since the days of COVID-19. Unemployment is historically low. Having said that, most Americans express frustration with the state of the economy, and this has hurt current President Biden. Why is that? There's been this interesting phenomenon where most people say, on average, say, like, I'm doing better, actually. Things are going okay for me. I've got a job. Maybe I've gotten an increase in my wages. But the economy itself is not doing very well, right? And so there's this disconnect between the feelings of individuals on average and their perceptions of the economy more generally. President Biden is hoping that will turn around. Okay, Dr. Bender, if you would click on the approval one. Oh, sorry, not the next slide, but that one right there. Thank you. The link before was just a measure of some measures of economic indicators. So how popular is President Biden? His approval rating on average is 40%. That means nearly 60% or 55%, some people don't answer, disapprove of the way that he's handling his job. You'll notice that the difference between the disapprove and approve has gotten wider over time, much to President Biden's chagrin. If President Biden were to win re-election, these approval ratings would be historically low for a president winning re-election. If you're a campaign advisor today, you'd say these trends really need to change before the time of the election, lest things may not go well for us. Okay, back to the slides, please. Okay, next slide. Well, how about President Trump? And again, the question's a little different. For the president in office, we say, do you approve or disapprove of the way the president is handling his job? The question for President Trump, since he's not currently in office, is just a question about favorability. Let's go ahead and click on that first link. So you might ask yourself, is it higher or is it lower for favorability for former President Trump? And notice it's a touch higher. On average today, it's 42.1%. Just to clarify, each of those dots you see is an individual survey, and that thick line is effectively an average across the survey, is a moving average. So his unfavorability is a little lower, his favorability is slightly higher. Okay, back to the slides. Now you may ask yourself, and a number of people have, there's a lot of things going on around President Trump, and as you may have seen in the news, he's currently in court in New York, and the New York Times, I'm not going to ask you to click on it, but it's there for reference, has a kind of overview summary that may be helpful in tracking some of these civil and criminal proceedings that have been following the former president. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how do we think about all of this in light of this system the U.S. has called the Electoral College? And a little bit about it. National or popular vote, same idea. In fact, Democrats have won the popular vote, the national vote, in every election since 2004. The Republicans were the ones in 2004 who won both the popular vote and the Electoral College. So you have, for example, an instance in 2016 where Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. She had the most number of votes cast in her favor, but Donald Trump was the winner in the Electoral College. This was a system, this was a compromise that was put together in the Constitution to balance states with larger populations and smaller populations and other points of contention in the Constitutional Convention. And what they decided is we're going to have this separate institution to elect the president. It's called the Electoral College. I once had a student write a paper who was interested in writing a paper about admission standards to the Electoral College. It's not a college, it's not a university, it's just a name for the institution that elects the president. So how do they elect it? Well, whoever wins the popular vote in a given state wins the Electoral College votes for that state. How are those votes determined? It's your number of senators, which is always 2, plus the number of people you have in the House of Representatives. In my home state of Alabama, we have 2 senators and 7 members of the House. And so we have 9 electoral college votes. In a state like Montana, because it's a smaller population state, they only have 1 member of the House, but 2 senators. So they have 3 votes. What paradoxically then is that what we anticipate for this election is that the election will come down to a handful of voters, and by that I mean comparatively against the US population, in a certain number of states. Those states, for example, are the former so-called blue wall states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, states where the Democrats historically have been advantaged, but places in each instance where Trump won in 2016. Also, some states in the Southeast and Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. To give you a sense, if Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, those are roughly the margins of victory in the 2020 election. Less than 11,000 people, less than 13,000 people in Georgia, less than 21,000 voters in Wisconsin. Should those go the other direction, right? Difference in outcome. So if you're thinking about President Biden's strategy, one strategy is simply to repeat what you did in 2020, and then for President Trump, repeat what you did in 2016. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And that's what that looks like. Notice the change from 2016 on your left to 2020 on your right. And it's Wisconsin. It's a state in the center part of the country, north. It's right next to Minnesota, which is in blue in 2016. Notice in 2020, they're both blue. Trump had won in 2016. Pennsylvania, which is right underneath New York on the eastern coast, changed. Georgia, which is in the south, just above Florida, you see it in red in 2016 and blue in 2020. And then Arizona, similarly in the southeast, borders with Mexico, red in 2016, blue in 2020. So we'll see where things head from here. Okay, next slide. So how, if you were a campaign, you were thinking about American society and you were a campaign consultant, what might you say to these 2 candidates? And the first thing, if you were hired as a campaign consultant, that you would want to say is, no surprise, the goal is to win, right? And so this means that you have to think in 2 terms. One is, I need to make sure that the people who like me show up to vote. This is true in any political system where turnout is not 100%. Think about, we're here in Poland, think about turnout in the last election, last fall, last autumn, very high, but not 100%. And so candidates want to get their supporters to show up. They're going to use slogans, rhetoric, appeals to try to get their base supporters to show up on election day. For Trump, that means, make America great again, right? The hats, the slogans, the rallies that excite and energize his supporters. For Biden, that means bringing together the coalition of supporters that he had in 2020, but seems to be somewhat less enthusiastic in this 2024 election. And Biden is facing challenges, and I'll use the war in Gaza as an example, where some of his supporters have been frustrated with, for example, U.S. support of Israel in the face of what's happening in Gaza. Some have been, have questioned foreign policy, whether the U.S. should do more to support or less to support Israel. And so these kinds of challenges mean that maybe some of his supporters on just this issue alone decide, I don't feel as enthusiastic voting this time around. The second part is persuasion. In the end, most people already know who they're voting for. Think about yourself and your political affiliations. Chances are you have a political party that you align with, and you'll vote for that party in the next election. For some of you, maybe you're on the fence. And that's a small percentage of people in the US right now. They're 2 political parties, they're very divided. Slide to go there, but just that's enough people to influence the outcome. 11,000 voters in a given state can be persuaded to vote one way or another. And so the issues that come up, the issues that the campaigns talk about, can drive some of these voters to say, okay, you know what, I voted for Trump last time, I'm going to vote for Biden, or sorry, I voted for Biden last time, I'm voting for Trump this time, or vice versa. Okay, next slide, please. So think for yourself for a moment, what are the issues that you think will persuade or mobilize voters in 2024, and which party do you see as advantaged on these issues? And I'll leave just a moment here. If someone wants to raise a question, what are the issues you think that are most pressing for the US today? So turning it back to the audience, what issues do you think are pressing for the US today? Anybody want to chime in here on issues facing the US today? Okay, thanks.
If I may,
Yes,
for me,
please.
I think like gun control is always an important issue, right? During every campaign. So this topic of like allowing or disallowing to bear guns, that's for sure. But also wars going on, also medical care. So a couple of issues actually.
Great, thanks. And Anna, you had a comment too. Thank you, Lydia.
Yes, I don't know if that's the most pressing issue, but it's always very shocking for me to learn about the healthcare situation in America. The prices associated with that are just horrendous. And so I'm not sure if that's one of the pressing issues that American people think are pressing.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Very
Great,
shocking for
thanks.
me. Thank you.
Yeah, okay,
Pressing and
thanks.
depressing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Bartos, I saw had a hand. If I'm pronouncing correctly.
Yeah, so I think another issue that might be of concern to the voters might be the issue of abortion, because I'm pretty sure that it's been kind of on the rise when it comes to relevancy lately, especially with some like anti-abortion legislation being passed in a few states. That's from what I heard.
Yeah, great. So these are all fantastic comments. I'm going to go ahead and actually click on, Dr. Bennett, if you'd click on this link. This was a survey from Pew. Pew is a really reputable survey institute. They're a charitable trust from their research center. It's that figure. And maybe if we click on the figure, it might blow,
Philip, hello. I guess we can just explore the issues now.
Yeah, so this is a survey that was asked of the U.S. Citizens just before President Biden's State of the Union address in March of 2024. So notice the number one issue: strengthen the economy. Some of the others that follow may surprise you. So to the commenter's point, reducing healthcare costs came in pretty high, number 4, but defending against terrorism, so still very much a concern and on the minds of US citizens. This one actually surprised me, reducing influence of money in politics. Some of this is, so this is an interesting point about doing research. Sometimes if you give people a list of things and say, which of these are most important to you, they respond a little differently than if you ask them an open-ended question and say, what issues are on your mind today? So maybe people wouldn't say, some of these if it wasn't given to them on a list. But anyway, just to give you a sense that money in politics is a concern, and it ranks pretty highly. Immigration, I was surprised, was not a bit higher than it is, but it's certainly in the top set of issues that Americans raise as important. Now, you might think about which party then is advantaged on these issues. Certainly, President Biden has been trying to make the case that his economic proposals have been successful, that inflation has come down, that unemployment is low, that we have new infrastructure, that there's cleaner energy than there was before. But again, that message is not always sinking in and resonating with voters. Former President Trump is campaigning on that his economy prior to COVID-19 was a stronger economy. The way in which you interpret those messages oftentimes is a function of your partisanship. If you're a Republican, you say, yeah, the economy was better under Trump. If you're a Democrat, you say, no, it's better under Biden. Okay, so again, let's go ahead and go back to the slides. Right, so the next one, why is it challenging? And this leads me to this next point. Why is it challenging to persuade? You can mobilize, you can get people excited and energetic. You oftentimes use emotional, affective rhetoric to do that. Studies have shown that fear and anxiety are pretty powerful motivators of campaign behavior, of turning out to vote. And so candidates will use those strong emotions in their campaign ads and their attacks against their opponent. But how about persuasion? How do I get someone to see that they should vote for the Republicans or the Democrats? And again, that's challenging. Most people have views about Trump or Biden, views about the Democrats and the Republicans, and it'll be hard to change their minds. I won't click on the link, but as an example, you don't have to, but during President Trump's presidency, his approval ratings were relatively flat, despite all that happened during his presidency. A core group of people always said, yes, I approve. A core group of people on the opposite side said, no, I disapprove, and a little bit of fluctuation in between. Okay, next slide. So we call this idea of motivated reasoning, that people are motivated to pick their team and stay with it. Works for sports teams as well, right? You have your allegiance to a different football club and you defend it, you stay with it through thick and thin. Religion can work this way as well. You have strong motivation to keep going with your religious preference. And so what happens in politics then is we say, oh, I'm going to act according to this way. And when counter information comes to me, I'm going to discount it. I'm going to filter the information through my partisanship. Not only that, but more people now express antipathy and even animosity, strong dislike towards the other party. Those people also tend to be more politically active, right? So they're more extreme, they're more politically active, they know their team, they want their team to win, they want the other side to lose. And so we've seen this rise in polarization, especially in US politics, over the last 20 to 30 years. But even more so in the last animosity we see people express towards the opposite party. At the same time, we also have disinterest and apathy among a good part of the public, lower levels of political knowledge. If you ask, as an example, which party controls the House? Well, 2/3 of Americans will get that answer correct. The reality is there are two parties. So if just guessing, 50% should get the answer correct. So we're slightly better than guessing, if you will, right? So a lot of people, those voters are potentially persuadable, if the right message comes along, if the right person connects with them via a TV ad or even a knock on the door, but they're also harder to reach. They're harder to mobilize. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Add to this the complexities of the US media system. And by the way, this is just, I'm winding down here, so we're going to have time for a Q&A here very shortly. Add to this the complexities of the US media system. The US system is a so-called liberal model. That means liberal economically, not politically, I'm not talking about here, but market-driven. To be able to stay in business, you have to be profitable. Very little of the US media system, the news media system, is publicly owned. You may have heard of National Public Radio or PBS, where Sesame Street appears. It receives a small portion of tax dollars to continue its operations. Most of the US media industry is owned and stays in business in as much as it can be economically viable. Also the case that a lot of news industries are facing decreased audience for their news. Most people say they get their news, for example, via social media. Most young people aren't reading, online news with regularity. The audience for news is principally an older one, and as that audience ages, the future for the news industry looks at this point uncertain and dubious. Decreased audience. If you get your news for social media, that doesn't necessarily mean you're bringing in revenue to the media company. That is, you're not going to their webpage and clicking on a story and that company is getting advertising revenue and the like. Instead, maybe it's coming through your social media channels in passing. What that's meant is that for the news industry to be competitive, as one scholar wrote even 20 years ago now, it's all the news that's fit to sell, as opposed to the classic all the news that's fit to print. Things that contain drama, conflict, sensationalism, people who are familiar with us, people who the things that are in proximity, that are closer to us, news from countries that are geographically closer or that are familiar are going to dominate headlines. So when
I'm afraid we cannot hear you, Philip.
I can't. I just can see my screen, so I don't know what's going on there. But I hope Philip will be back. Hello?
Philip, try to unmute yourself. Maybe that will help. Mute and unmute.
Mm.
He's not with us, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It was as much as the university internet could hold.
That's why I decided to stay at home
Yeah.
to host and to
I
be
guess
the chair for
we're
the presentation.
prophets, Litka.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't see.
Okay, I think I'm back. Am I here? You can hear me?
You are back. Yes.
Boy, that happened just so suddenly. So thank you. How far did we get in the slide?
We got to the celebrity thing.
Okay,
Yes.
good. So thinking about the current trial for President Trump, this is dominating news coverage as the president, from the moment he enters the courtroom, there's commentators, there's online, there's constant coverage. Although this case will go on for some time, so it'll be interesting to see if that level of attention will continue over the course of the trial. So it's an example again of a system where we have media that's profit-driven, and that has implications for the kind of news that we receive. Specifically about the campaign, there's less attention to what the candidates stand for. We can speculate about what will happen. The presidential candidates talk about what they'll do, but there's far more media attention to, for example, the back and forth of the candidates, who's ahead of the polls, who's behind, the strategy. How is President Biden going to, campaign in the state of Arizona? The choices for President Trump's. These items, which are less consequential to what will happen once one of them is elected into office. Okay, last slide. So I'll have Dr. Bennett, if you click on this slide, I will just go ahead and show you. So to end on a note, most people at the beginning of the day said that they thought Trump was to the advantage. This is run by the University of Iowa. It's a prediction market. Basically, the way it works is that any individual can buy a share. So it works like a stock market. Currently, for President Biden at 55 cents, and were he to win, you would receive $1 back. So President Biden is currently, based on these markets, ahead in the election. President Trump is down a bit. Now he's down, I've noticed recently, as the beginning of the trials have taken place. We'll see if those numbers bounce back again. It's not to say that these things are right. It's just to say this is one way of thinking about what do a number of people think about what's going to happen. I'm not in any way advocating that you would take part in this prediction market, just using it as an example of where people think the candidates stand. Okay, so if we go ahead and go back to the slides. So I have my contact information there. I'm happy now in the last 10 minutes or so to turn it over to questions. Apologies again for some of the technical issues throughout today, but I'm glad that at least the conversation could mostly take place. Thanks for your attentiveness and happy to take some questions.
Philip, thank you so much. Now I'm back from the presentation mode.
Yes.
Also, thank you so much. We survived, and it was brilliant. Thank you for keeping us updated, let's say, in what's happening. We kind of get bits and pieces of the information that you showed, but not so much probably in depth as we had a chance to hear today. So maybe this is like unique opportunity to ask a question. Maybe not about the outcome of the election, because I don't think even Philip can tell. But is there anything you would like to know more about, the election process, Natalia?
So I have a question, because from what I understand, Donald Trump has not been found guilty yet. But if he was found guilty, will he be able to become a president, or is it like, are there laws preventing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that a lot of people have been asking. Yeah, the reality is that it certainly would be complicated. We're in a situation that is very much unique, but there are not laws. The way that the Constitution basically, turned this over to the voters in the Electoral College to make a decision, and there's nothing in there that states. There's some qualifications for office. You have to be, for example, 35 years old and a number of things, but there isn't anything specifically about the kind of situation we have today. So it really would be up to the voters through the Electoral College to make a decision. Certainly, President Trump has been talking a lot, former President Trump has been talking a lot about these court cases, saying that they're it's the Biden administration coming after him, or that, using this rhetoric is that it can happen to me, it can happen to you. And so a lot of his supporters have discounted these, accusations against him. His opponents, of course, have been using this to say, here's reason not to support the former president. So it is in uncharted waters. It's a great question. In short, no, it would be up to the voters in the Electoral College to decide who would be the next president.
Thank you, Natalia, for your question. Anybody else would like to? Yes, we have Natalia Haito.
I have a question more about the age, because I know that people are focused on the fact that Joe Biden is on the older side of the presidents. I mean, he's, I guess, the oldest. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Donald Trump is only 4 years his junior. And people tend to not focus on that. They tend to not see that, and I wonder why exactly is that.
Yeah, it's thank you, Natalia. It's a good question. All these questions and comments have been great. Thank you. So it is something that President Biden has been trying to push back against. So he at times will have attacks from President Trump about misstatements or otherwise. and he's pushed back and said, well, former President Trump has made those same, mistakes. He once confused Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, with Nikki Haley, his opponent, for example. For whatever reason, it does seem to be the item that's really tracking and following President Biden. And back to the news media, that's one of the reasons I finished there is, themes that are familiar, conversations that are familiar. They have, that's one of the things about President Biden that I'm sure his campaign staff is frustrated with the way the media has covered that issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have room for one more question, I believe, before the break.
So maybe I'll ask a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So the question is about wars, meaning that, of course, now everybody's talking about Palestine and Israel, but how about the war in Ukraine? Because I know that many Americans ask me specifically about my stance on this war, how Americans should be involved in helping Ukraine, or this Russia versus Ukraine dynamics. And given that it's, the topic of war is always interesting when it comes to elections. So, candidates are talking about that. Do they still talk about Ukraine in the US in the context of, using this as an argument for voting Trump or voting Biden? Or is it only Palestine these days? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you. So this is, I think, a broader question that you raise about foreign policy, and it tends to be that there might be, plenty of conversation kind of happening in news media. There's been coverage of the war, both in Ukraine and in Gaza. At the same time, voters, evidence suggests that voters principally make their decisions based on domestic policy issues. So a lot of conversation, interest.
I think we lost you for a second. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
back.
Briefly?
Yes,
back.
Briefly.
No, back again?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Well, that's not finished.
Oops.
Oops, yeah.
We're sorry.
Yeah, very sorry for that.
Okay, back. Yeah, it's a bit choppy, but just to say quickly, so it's domestic policy concerns that typically dominate, and particularly the and I think I'll probably end there. Maybe I can continue that conversation. Sorry about that.
Well,
thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. We're very sorry for those technical issues. That's the life. And life goes on, I guess. Philip, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this campaign closer to our door as well. We know that, and I think everybody experiences that the more familiar the issue is, the closer to your door, actually, it's more prominent. So the wars do shape, like I observe what's happening in Colombia to my horror, actually, the university and the protests. So it's happening, but probably the economy and stuff like that will win again. Thank you to all the participants, and my big request, if I may ask people to show up, if possible, for just a second on your cameras, so that we can capture the spirit of being in the hall, lecture hall, with everybody, so that I could take a picture, like a group photo. If those of you who do not have issues with that, it would be wonderful. We're still waiting. Philip, do you think you could show up just for a moment, or you? Oh yes, here you are. No, I can't see you. It's like a blank space. Let's wait one more. No, I can't see Philip. Philip, hello. Oh, no, the signals, at least no, I can't see. Sorry, maybe it's my signal. But anyway, it's been a challenge, we know, but we're brave enough. I got it. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. to all of you. Now we have a break. The break is about 20 minutes now, and we will start our next sessions, the parallel sessions, at around 11:50. So I guess that's goodbye. Thank you for participating. Thank you, Philip, once again. It was a pleasure.
Thanks again. Thank you.
And let's go and grab coffee again. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Excuse me. That was sad.